Hi guys, I'm Janae Brazil and today we're finally doing our first driver ratings for the F1 season for the Australian Grand Prix. Now before I get into it, I woke up sick yesterday, so that's just great. So if I sound awful or if I'm yelling because I can't hear anything, that is why. But we will get straight into this. I'm going to do this in reverse constructors order, so for the current standings, and to be honest, this will probably be the order I do it in all season because I don't want to have to reorganise the table I have this in. But saying that, we will be starting with the Aston Martin drivers and Fernando Alonso, who I can't rate, honestly. The Aston Martin in general right now is barely a car, it's closer to a fucking green torture device. So for that reason alone, I cannot rate either Fernando Alonso or Lance Stroll. So there really isn't much to say. Lance Stroll said that they circulated rather than racing. And yeah, Aston Martin right now isn't really a team where it's fair, I think, to rate the drivers on anything because they don't really have control over the fact the car is borderline undrivable. So yeah, I cannot rate their driving. So next up we have Cadillac, and this is similar to Aston Martin. We're going to start with Valtteri Bottas, who I also cannot rate because in qualifying the car is slow as shit, I think, no matter what him or Perez do, and in the race, obviously, he didn't finish. He only lasted, 15 laps or so. So, yeah, I can't rate that because ultimately Valtteri was just, again, at the whims of the car. I think there's going to be a lot of that this season, especially for the lower end of the midfield pack. I think the cars just are so inconsistent and there are such problems that I think rating the drivers is quite unfair. So, I also cannot rate Valtteri Bottas this week. Now, Sergio Perez, I have rated. I've given him a 4 out of 10 for the Australian Grand Prix. Similar to Bottas, it's hard to rate a lot of the driving because the Cadillac is just very slow. There are serious issues with that car on pace. But I have given Perez a 4 because I do think he was driving okay considering the pace of the car. But I do think some of the racing against Liam Lawson was a bit excessive. I don't really know why he was trying to shove him off track for 16th. That feels like a kind of waste of time and energy. And when the team more than anything else needs run time, I don't think we need to be risking the car in such a way just to, fight over fuck all, I guess. Next up we have Williams. This one's hard for me with these drivers. We're going to start with Carlos Sainz, who I gave a 5 out of 10. I considered not rating Carlos at all, to be honest, because, again, the Williams car is not in a great state. He didn't get to do qualifying because they couldn't get the car started for whatever reason. I forgot to look into that. But it's just not good, and then he's kind of forced in the race to just drive around. The only positions he really made up were for all the cars that DNF'd and then Perez, which, passing a Cadillac isn't super impressive considering the state of that car either. But yeah, it's a 5 for Carlos because I do think, he was driving okay, it's just the car isn't very good, so I can't really rate him higher. But he didn't do anything wrong all weekend, he was just kind of trying to do the best he could with what he had, which is not a lot. So yeah, it's a 5 for Carlos. Then we have Alex Albon, and also a 5 for him, although he did have a better time, I think, over the weekend than his teammate, but still, it's a 5. Again, qualifying was okay. Qualified 15th, I don't think that's the worst considering what we know of the Williams car. I do think being that far up the grid is saved a little bit by people like Max not being able to complete qualifying. So, there are places gained because of other people's issues for Albon, but that's not the worst qualifying he could have put together. And then 12th in the race, not too bad. He was, trying his best. Again, the Williams car is not great. It's clearly very slow, and yeah, Alex is just trying his best to make it. I think completing the race for Williams, considering where we thought they were going to be after not making it to the shakedown in Barcelona, I think it's not bad. So yeah, it's also a 5 for Alex Albon. Next up, we have the Alpines, which the Alpine in general, I will say, the car was better than I thought it would be this weekend. So we will start with Franco Colapinto, who I also gave a 5 out of 10. There are a lot of drivers that are getting 5s because they did nothing wrong, but I cannot rate them higher because the car makes it difficult to tell if their driving was very good. Franco qualified 16th, which I think he could have done a little better, maybe, based on his teammate. Although, how far off Gasly was he in Q2? Oh, he was quite a way off. You know, he was actually quite far off his teammate. So, yeah, it's not great from Franco in qualifying. And then again in the race, he was circulating. Didn't really see a lot of him. I think it was quite an anonymous race from a lot of the midfield because there was so much going on at the front. But yeah, he did okay. Like, the Alpine, I'm not entirely sure how good that car is right now, but Franco put together, I think, a decent enough race, so it's a 5. Then on to Pierre Gasly. I gave him a 7 because I think he actually put together quite a good race, considering I don't think the Alpine pace-wise is very good. He qualified 14th, but he was pretty well up on his teammate time-wise in qualifying. I actually think it was a pretty decent qualifying from Gasly. And in the race, he made it up into the points. You know, he came 10th, taking a single point home for Alpine, but that is, you know, already better than how they started last season. So I think it's a pretty good race from him. And there was some good wheel-to-wheel with him and Ocon as well. So I think overall it was a pretty good race for Pierre Gasly. Again, it's just the Alpine certainly hinders him from doing better, I think. Next up we have Audi, which is an interesting one because they just could not get 2 cars to make it through a session all weekend, it felt like. So for Hülkenberg, I'm not giving him a rating because he didn't even start the race. The qualifying was like fine, but I would struggle to rate him just based on that qualifying. And yeah, he didn't even get to start the race, and that was from no fault of his own, so it's just, I can't rate that this weekend. Then we have Gabriel Bortoleto, who I gave a 7. I think this was a pretty good race from Gabby overall. I think making it into Q3 was a great qualifying. It sucks that the car then died right before Q3 started. That's super unfortunate. I would have loved to have seen if he would have been able to at least out-qualify the V-carbs or at least split them, because there was such a gap between the qualifying laps for Lawson and Lindblad. I would have loved to have seen if he would have been able to qualify a couple positions higher, but 10th is nothing to really be mad at. And then he gained a position in the race. He came 9th, I think, again. It was good points for Audi to take home, and I think Gabby put together a pretty good race overall, so yeah, it's a 7. Next up we have V-carb, and we're going to start with Liam Lawson. He out-qualified his teammate, which I didn't think was going to happen, but it appears Lindblad had serious issues on his final lap, so it sucks that we don't really have a great comparison there if he would have out-qualified Liam without those problems. But yeah, I'm giving Liam Lawson a 4, however, because during the race, first of all, the race start was awful. He stalled off the line, complete mess. Thank God Franco had such good reaction time to Liam being stopped like that. And then just the rest of the race, I don't know, was pretty anonymous from him, except for then we saw him fighting Perez. And I mean, the move around the outside was certainly an ambitious one. I don't blame Liam for trying it, but I do think it was pretty risky, and I'm not shocked that then Sergio tried to push him off track for that. I think from both sides it was pretty poor wheel-to-wheel racing. But yeah, pace wasn't great. The start wasn't great, so yeah, it's a 4 for Lawson. Then we have our one rookie for the season, Arvid Lindblad, who I gave an 8 out of 10. I think this was a fantastic rookie showing, especially off the line, a great start. The fact that he was in the podium positions at one point in the early stages, just really fun to watch from Lindblad. I think it was a great way to start a rookie season. Also, even though I'm a Max fan, it was stressing me out. I do appreciate that he didn't just let Max by, and he was very willing to defend and like try something there. I think that's a really good sign for future racing from Lindblad. And I just think overall he did put together a really good race. I do think there are some issues with like battery deployment and his management there. You know, I was hoping he would at least hold Behrman back, but he just didn't manage that. But I don't think that's like too bad. It is his first Grand Prix, and I think it was a very good showing from him. So yeah, definitely an 8 out of 10. Then we have Haas, which is a car that I'm so confused about the pace of, to be honest. So we're going to start with Esteban Ocon. I gave Esteban a 6 out of 10. It was a pretty anonymous weekend, it felt like, other than of course watching Ocon fight Gasly, which is nothing new. Clearly we can't go a single, I swear, Australian Grand Prix especially, like these two just have to fight each other. But yeah, I mean, qualified 13th, I think that's not too bad for the Haas. I think that's kind of where it's supposed to be, so I'm not too concerned with that. And then he made up a couple of positions, got to 11th. It's an okay drive. I think it's nothing special, but it's nothing wrong with it either. I just think, yeah, he made it through the race and, you know, stayed within the midfield. Nothing really more to say about that. So yeah, it's a 6 out of 10. However, his teammate, Ollie Behrman, I've given an 8 out of 10 because I think there was some great racing from Ollie today. Honestly, I should up that to an 8.5. What am I saying? I actually think this was very good racing from Ollie Behrman. Qualified 12th, so ahead of his teammate, and then got up well into the points, came 7th. A really good race. I think some really good overtaking from Ollie. I think he's quite good with the battery deployment. He seemed to not really, especially against Lindblad, fall into the issues of like overdoing it to make the overtake and then running out of battery immediately after. I think he put together quite a good offensive drive there. And yeah, I just think really solid. I didn't really expect the Haas to be up this far. You know, he's best of the rest. So yeah, I think it's a super solid drive from Ollie Behrman, so it's an 8.5 out of 10. And then we have Red Bull. It's my team. It's my fucking circus to talk about, for fuck's sake. Let's get start with Isaac Hadjar, who, so hard because I'm tempted to rate him for the qualifying, but I do think without having any real show of his race pace, I have to just not rate him this week. Because, yeah, qualified third, which is phenomenal. To qualify behind the Mercedes is great, I think. And to be ahead of the Ferraris especially was a fantastic qualifying from Hadjar. But unfortunately, he was having car problems the entire race. He said that he knew that there was something wrong with the engine 100 metres into the race, and he was just kind of waiting for it to die, essentially. So, yeah, it's even hard to tell, like, how good any of his defending was during the 11 laps he completed, because he just didn't have the car under him. And so I just think it's too difficult to rate that, so I'm not going to. Next up, we have Max Verstappen. It's my driver. I'm going to try and be unbiased, but it's very hard for me. I'm giving Max an 8 this week. I do find in general Max is quite a hard driver to rate, because if any other driver made up 14 places in a race, you know, went 20th to 6th, we would be saying that's like the best driver of their career. But because it's Max, this becomes very difficult, because he does great comeback drives so often that it doesn't really feel impressive anymore. I also do think as well, lots of those midfield cars are just like seconds slower than him, so he didn't have to try too hard to overtake some of them. So I don't think it's his most impressive comeback. Obviously, qualifying was bad, but that was not his fault. There was a software issue in the car. It completely locked the rear axles, and then he was just, you know, at the whims of the car, and it was going to hurtle into the wall no matter what he did, or what he could even attempt to do to fix that. But yeah, I think it's a good comeback drive. I kind of think that no matter where he qualified, this is sixth would have been the sort of position he would have ended up in. Like, he could have maybe passed Lando, but I think the McLarens and the Red Bulls are so similar in pace that I don't think it's a given that he would make that move. And he said the tyre deg was really high on the Red Bull, especially on the hard tyre, so there wasn't a lot he could do. He was running out of tyres at that point to try and pass Lando, so I think it's a good recovery drive. I think it's kind of damage limitation more than anything else. And so for that reason, I'm going to give Max an 8 because I still think it's an impressive drive, but not anything special from Max Verstappen. Next up we have McLaren, and I have to start by talking about Oscar Piastri, and this is tough. I have to give Oscar a 3. I even think some would call that quite generous, but he qualified 5th ahead of his teammate, who is the current world champion, so I think that's a pretty good qualifying. I think that's kind of where the McLaren should be, kind of up just behind the Ferraris. I would be interested to know where, if Max had been able to qualify properly, if this would have dropped the McLarens further. I would say so, just based on Hadjar qualifying so high. But yeah, for Oscar, obviously a pretty good qualifying, but followed by a crash on the installation lap, which he has said himself was 80% his fault. Like, that is predominantly driver error, even though there's also the issue of the battery giving him more energy than he thought it would going into that corner, and the other issues with the current cars. But yeah, Oscar ultimately shouldn't have hit that curb that hard, especially on an installation lap, and it cost him a chance at competing in his home Grand Prix. And so I feel really bad for him. It sucks, but it has to be a 3 out of 10. It's just, yeah, I don't really know what I'm supposed to say about that one. Next up we have Lando Norris. So I'm giving a 7 out of 10. This was a very anonymous race for Lando. I think especially it's his first Grand Prix as world champion, and unfortunately for him, the car that he's been given isn't great, and I don't think is as good as I think McLaren thought it was going to be. I think they thought their pace was going to be better because they have that Mercedes engine, but it just was very anonymous. He qualified behind his teammate in 6th, and then he finished 5th in the race behind the Mercedes and the Ferraris, which I kind of think is again where the McLaren should finish. I think the Red Bull and the McLaren cars are just going to stay stuck behind those front two teams for a while. I think it will just be interchangeable between the 4 of them, although I imagine on a day where Max wasn't making a big comeback drive, he would have passed Lando, so I do think that saved him a little bit. But yeah, it was such an anonymous race from Lando Norris. He was barely on my screen, and to be honest, except for when we thought Max maybe had a shot at that overtake, but I think he ran out of tyres, so yeah, it's a 7 for Lando. Now let's get into the Ferraris. I'm going to be frustrated again because for whatever reason Ferrari strategists made these choices and it did harm their drivers. We're going to start with Lewis Hamilton. Qualifying was not great from Lewis. I think to be out-qualified by both McLarens is a problem, especially like your teammates up in 4th to qualify down in 7th is not a good qualifying at all. And then in the race he came 4th. I do think if with a better qualifying, Lewis could have been more in the fight, but the issue is that he positioned himself where he had to fight more to catch George Russell and Charles Leclerc, and so while he was great off the line and all of that, it was a good race from Lewis. I'm glad to see him more like himself, because last season it just didn't feel like Lewis Hamilton's caliber of driving when we were watching him. But this was like a fine race. I do think that Ferrari strategy harmed both him and Charles, even though I don't think they would have beat the Mercedes, or at least Lewis certainly wouldn't have. But I think without even that chance, it's difficult to tell. So I've given Lewis Hamilton a 7.5 out of 10. I think it's like a decently good drive, but not anything special from him. I do wonder what we would have gotten if him and Charles had the chance to fight more. But yeah, for now, a 7.5, it's a good race. It's better, certainly far better than I think Lewis was driving at the end of last season. So that's a positive. Next up we have Charles Leclerc, who I'm giving a 9 out of 10. I think he put together the best race of anyone this weekend, despite the Ferrari strategy being bad. I do not understand, at the very least, splitting the strategy between the drivers, but yeah, I think a podium for Ferrari in the opening race of the season is good. I think qualifying was good. I do think he probably could have put together a better lap to out-qualify Hadjar, but I think that might be more on account of Hadjar putting together a really good lap versus Charles putting together a bad one. But yeah, a great drive from Charles. He really is one of our best in wheel-to-wheel racing. And I think he really showed up George Russell, because despite the fact the Ferrari is clearly the slower car than the Mercedes, Charles was so good and made George Russell's life far more difficult than I think he thought it was going to be. And that's ultimately what we want. We want competitive racing at the front especially. And Charles Leclerc put on just a masterclass really in both defensive and offensive driving. And yeah, I will never get sick of watching Charles Leclerc drive wheel to wheel with anyone. He is just so good at it. I think he was really good at the battery deployment, except for kind of towards the end of that back and forth fight. But I really do think it was a fantastic drive from Charles Leclerc, and I do think if the Ferrari strategy had been better, if they had pitted him under the VSC, that he maybe would have had a chance to fight Russell for the win, or at the very least he maybe would have had more of a chance to beat Kimi Antonelli. I do think it would have made Mercedes' life more difficult anyway, but overall a fantastic drive from Charles, so it's a 9 out of 10. And then finally we have Mercedes, and we're going to start with Kimi Antonelli. I'm giving a 7 for the Australian Grand Prix. I even think this might be a little generous of me, but I do think if you come second in the race, it's hard to rate you lower than that. But Kimi Antonelli got, I think, unimaginably lucky during several parts of this weekend. First of all, that Mercedes is so fast that what I would call a pretty messy qualifying lap was still enough to be second on the grid. And then in the race, awful start off the line. Really, the only person whose start was worse, I think, was Liam Lawson. Kimi's start was not good at all. So then he had to claw back all of those positions. Again, I think he's very lucky. The pace of that car is so good. Also, normally practice doesn't matter, but I think absolutely demolishing your car in free practice 3, so you have like 2.5 hours before qualifying, is unacceptable from a driver. I would think that Kimi would not have even had a chance at qualifying if it wasn't for Max causing a red flag, because I don't think the team would have had time to repair the car without that. So I think he got very lucky in that regard. And then in the race, he was fine. Again, certainly a beneficiary of the poor Ferrari strategy. And yeah, I think it was a decent race from Kimi, but I think there are serious problems. And I think if he wants to pose any real threat to George, he has to start getting some of these things together, because this was quite a messy weekend and he still walked away second in the race. But I do think it raises questions about if he's ready for a car like this, and what's clearly going to be a dominant championship car. And yeah, it's certainly not the best we've seen from him. I do think he's capable of better driving than this, but this weekend was a tough one, I think. And I think the car really saved him on several occasions. And then finally, we have George Russell. I've given an 8.5 out of 10. I think it was a good, solid drive from George Russell. I think his qualifying, even though obviously the car is also very good, I do think he was pretty tidy and good in his qualifying laps, so I don't have any real criticisms there. But in the race as well, I do think the reason why he's raced lower than Charles is in that wheel-to-wheel, I think he should not have been struggling anywhere near as much as he was when that Ferrari is not as good as the Mercedes. Just is that simple. And the fact that Charles was able to make his life so difficult is both representative of Charles Leclerc being so good wheel-to-wheel, but I also think really showed, I think, maybe for the first time, or like one of the first times in a while at least, some real cracks in the armour of George Russell's defensive driving, especially, because I don't think it should have been that hard, and I don't think it should have taken him that long to regain the lead of the race. And then I think he was very lucky that Ferrari made stupid decisions, because I do think he may have been more at risk if Ferrari had pit under the VSC. So while it is a very good drive from George Russell, it isn't anything special. I think an 8.5 is pretty fair for the weekend he's had. I think it's a good solid weekend for, you know, the start of what is going to be a championship campaign for George Russell and his first time really having that kind of shot. I'm very interested to see if his consistency that we've really praised him for the last couple of seasons will actually show itself in this title campaign, because I do think it changes once a title is on the line. For instance, Lando Norris was a driver that was rated pretty highly, and then as soon as he kind of had title chances in 2024, we saw it was very difficult for him, and there became several issues in his driving. So I'm very interested to see if George Russell will have any of the same problems. And I do think the wheel-to-wheel Charles Leclerc did already point out some issues, and if that Ferrari gets better, then I do think George Russell may have a harder time getting this title than he originally thought he would, considering the car he's been given. And so that is all 22 driver ratings for the Australian Grand Prix. We've made it through the first race of the season, guys. Thank fucking God. Who knows where the season's going to go? I mean, I do think it's quite obvious that Mercedes is a ridiculously fast car. However, Ferrari have definitely given us a positive surprise. I just need our strategists to do better, because it's one thing to have the car and have the drivers, but you also have to have all the other pieces of the puzzle to mount a title campaign, especially against a car that looks as dominant on pace as the Mercedes. But so yeah, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit the like button, and if you would like to see even more from me, including more driver ratings such as next week for China, then please subscribe. And if you would like to see even more from me, you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok. All those things are linked down below, where you can see my other work as a makeup and special effects artist, and whatever else I decide to post, really. But yeah, that's all. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!